Hi, everybody, and welcome back. We're going to continue on our discussion of the parts of an organization and how they fit into our ESRM model. I know that this course may not be as you expected. You're probably saying, well, why aren't we looking at what a security manager does every day? And we'll get to some of those things, but I suggest that studying every part of the organization that you're going to deal with on a daily basis and how you form those relationships will make you the best security manager you could be. So bear with me while we go through the different parts of an organization and how they work with security, because that's what you're going to be doing the majority of your time, is working with others. That collaboration between different functions is key to your success. So this week we're going to talk about engineering and facilities partnerships. It's a huge one for security managers, probably as impactful as the one with HR. And in fact, in some cases more so. So let's just jump into this and understand what engineering and facilities departments do for an organization. So this week we'll go over some of the basic functions of engineering and facilities partners, and as in past weeks, your mileage may vary. Every organization does things a little bit differently. In many cases, the security manager may report to the engineering and facilities department. I have seen that in a number of organizations because we're talking about control of facilities in some ways. In those relationships, I've seen them good and bad. They really are people dependent, but it's not a bad thing if you go work in an engineering department as a security manager. It's actually, you'll see some advantages as we go through this week. We're going to talk about the way these functions impact you. We're going to talk a little bit about facility certifications that directly impact security managers, specifically in your monitoring rooms, which you're going to need your engineering facilities people to get designed right, or you won't have a good room. There's unique risks to engineering facilities. Obviously, facilities have a risk in and of themselves of anything from vandalism to terrorism attacks. So, we've got to look at those things from the security perspective. And then, how do we work security and facilities into this ESRM model? That's hugely important to us because we want to have a very holistic program where we look at the actual risks to the business rather than just throw up guns and guards and roving patrols, cameras on every corner. If you don't know what you're protecting and you don't understand each business partner's unique risks, then you're not going to have a very solid program, and you will make a mistake and something will go wrong. So we've had our ESRM family building now: security, HR, finance, IT, engineering, facilities now gets added to the family. This is probably a good place to talk a little bit about engineering facilities generally, and to put it in some perspective for you. So if human resources shut down for a couple of weeks, right? There was there was a pandemic and it only affected human resources people and they couldn't do their jobs. You might have some problems. You might get to the point where, people's pay is starting to be impacted, right? They normally help with finance with payroll, right? HR does the planning of payroll and compensation, and finance writes the checks, and IT even gets in on that. But let's take a couple of weeks with no engineering and facilities. The lights are out, the water doesn't work, the trash hasn't been picked up, and basically everything comes to a standstill. You can operate usually for a week at any facility without IT. I know that sounds odd, especially to you cybersecurity majors, but think about if all computers shut down and you're in a facility that produces, I toured a facility one time, Ballpark Franks, right? Hot dog maker. Terrible place to work if you ask me, and certainly not a great place to tour. Once you've seen sausage made, as they say, you don't want to eat it anymore. But Ballpark Franks, right? If the IT department went down, which controls the automation of the equipment that makes the hot dogs, went down, you would not be able to make hot dogs. But you would probably still bring your people in and say, all right, look, machinery's down, IT, the network crashed, and it's going to be down for a week. We're going to do a top-to-bottom cleaning of the facility. We are going to do organization of our packaging, right? Because as things go on, things get disorganized. We're going to go through and do a training week, right? We're going to have sit-down classroom training. We're going to spend this week doing other things. We're going to lose money. It's definitely a hit, right, when your systems are down. But we will survive. Think about that same week where engineering and facilities goes down at that Ballpark Franks facility. Now, just like any other facility, they have waste. Although in hot dog making, there's very little waste. Everything from oinks to eyeballs goes in those things. But nonetheless, there is some waste. Now think about that waste sitting for a week. Think about the garbage not being picked up for a week. Facilities takes care of that. They have the housekeeping staff, right? Nothing's moving. There's no water to clean with. There is no power to really see with. So engineering facilities has kind of an has a much larger impact than other organizations in many ways, simply because of the types of things they do. If you've ever been in New York City during a garbage strike, that really is part of the engineering facilities function of New York City. If you've ever been there during a garbage strike, you don't want to walk up and down the streets, especially in Manhattan where it's very tight, right? Where you're walking by mounds and mounds of garbage. So, think about engineering facilities as a very big player with a lot of built-in power, if you will, because if they don't succeed, an entire organization can really be put into turmoil, more so than some of the other organizations, right? You could have no security department for a day, and if you had no incident that day, you just count yourself lucky. And in fact, some people make the plan to say, I don't need security because I've had no incidents. That's a false kind of a narrative there. But if you took all the guards away for a day and nothing happened, you survived. If you took all the power away and all the water away, you may not. I mean, disease comes quickly. If you look at the fall of the British Empire in India, there was a big problem with cholera after just a few days when the facilities were shut down. So that's where you've got to really concentrate on engineering facilities as a major player in your ESRM family. What are some of the basic functions of engineering and facilities? Well, building, design, and construction. And let's look at the university physical plant, the campus itself here as an example. All of the buildings that were built on the campus were managed by the engineering facilities department. They arranged for a construction manager to come in who brought in plumbers and electricians and masons and carpenters to build those buildings. And they did the design. They worked with the architects and they managed the construction. Once those buildings are built, then we have space planning and space assignment. Who gets what office? How big of an area does security studies get versus criminal justice based on the number of majors perhaps? And as you probably know, the number of security studies majors we have is actually growing slightly in just about every year. Criminology is pretty steady, so over time you would think that space planning would say, okay, security studies needs a little more space. So they do that type of space planning. Obviously repairs and maintenance, including janitorial service and lawn care and snow removal and parking lot and sidewalk maintenance, all of those things that keep the physical plant running. Capital project management, so you can imagine that many of the things on a campus, like a new building, will require capital. We studied capital and expense, right? And so they manage a lot of big capital projects with big budgets. There's the utilities, right? The lights and the heat. You can imagine being at SRU in February and the heat isn't working. It would be a pretty miserable place to be. And if you think about it, most businesses, engineering and facilities are really only second to payroll and then direct procurement. And in fact, in the case of SRU, you really don't have much direct procurement, right? Direct procurement is payroll because the product is in education. So it's not like we have, at the end of the day, we pack up all of the education we made and we put it in a truck and we go sell it on Amazon, right? It's a intellectual product. So in this case, if you look at the annual report from SRU, you see that tuition and fees brought in about $98 million last year. And maintenance facilities and utilities ate up about $25 million of that. So we're looking at about 25% of budget to keep the physical plant running. And if you think about that, I mean, it's not unthinkable. Anything you touch when you get on that campus is something that, in fact, before you even get on campus, right? You see a sign that says Slippery Rock University. That sign was paid for with engineering facilities money. The lights that light it up, the parking lot you park in has to be paved occasionally, has to be striped occasionally, has to be plowed more than occasionally in the wintertime. All of those things. Then the walk on the sidewalk, the grass that's being cut, the handrail on the stair that you grab, all of that falls under the engineering facilities, the physical plant. And that's why they have such a huge budget. And having such a huge budget may have some impact on the amount of power they yield when it comes to what others do. And when we talked about the Facility Security Committee last week and the equal vote, I'm not so sure that it's equal if the facilities manager is building a new building for the HR department and the facility manager really wants to vote on something at that Facility Security Committee. Is the HR lead going to balk if that facilities guy is going to build him a new brand new building and give him a nice big palatial office? I don't know. There could be undue influence there. So when you look at something like engineering facilities with such a huge portion of the budget, you have to understand that they carry a huge amount of power, and to understand that that's why you want to have a really positive relationship with them. So as we go through each one of these sub-functions, if you will, of the engineering facilities department, I want you to think about how you might work with the engineering and facilities department to make them more successful in that regard. The list that I put together is mostly questions to get you to think about how you can do that. But I'm betting you could answer each one of those questions very easily with one way that you can support engineering facilities and vice versa to have a symbiotic relationship where you can then bring them into the ESRM family and show shared risks and shared mitigations. So we're going to look at the functions of engineering and facilities really as one. Okay. We're going to think about the associated risks and then think again about that power dynamic of such a huge organization with huge capital. So building design and construction is a huge part of what the engineering side of the house does. And if you think about it, every building and every building modification requires a new risk and vulnerability assessment, even if it's just informal, right? So I will tell you a horror story. I had a very large product storage cage at a facility. It was probably, it had a ceiling that went up about 21 feet, high bay, and it was probably, good 1,500 to 2,000 square feet of cage, right? It was chain link fence, 20 feet high, and 20, 30 feet long, and 100 feet, whatever. It was just a big cage, and there was one way in and one way out, and I monitored that with cameras, and it was, pretty secure. It didn't have many problems, and they started to get reports of loss from it. I went in and found out that the engineering department had put another door on the other side of the cage. They had cut in through the chain link and put in a gate because of fire code. Well, we hadn't done a vulnerability assessment on that, hadn't put any alarms on those, and we were getting shrinkage out that back gate because everybody knew there was no alarm because you could see the alarm contacts, the little switches that go on an alarm on a chain link fence. You can't hide them anywhere, so they get bolted to the outside. Everybody could tell there was nothing there, and it was full of consumer goods at the time, things like razor blades and cough drops and those types of things that my company was making at the time. So you need to understand what's being housed in a new building, where it's going to be housed, because when there's changes in a renovation, you could open up a new vulnerability, just like I said in the case of that cage. Crime prevention through environmental design, and I'm hoping everyone in the class, based on prerequisites, has heard of CPTED before. But in a new building, if you can build in certain protections, if you can build it so that it is not accessible to people, if you can build it so that there's, perhaps a pond that goes around part of it, right? Those are all environmental things that you can build into a building. It doesn't even have to be a natural feature. If you have, if you look at the U.S. Capitol building, there are huge steps going up to the Capitol building. Whether or not that was planned as a security thing, I doubt it. It was probably more of a, let's make it look like a palace. But you're not going to ram the domed part of the Capitol building and go up those stairs. I mean, you're just not going to drive the average vehicle up those stairs and get very far because it's a long staircase, and cars don't climb stairs very well. They can. You could use something with, big tires on it, and you could probably climb the stairwell. But you're not going to do it undetected. It's not a great way to ram that building, right? So when people are building buildings and designing buildings and renovating buildings, you want to understand whether or not they've put in those types of design features that help with security right from jump, right? So you need to really have a seat at the table with engineering and facilities. You have to form that relationship with them, or they're not going to call you before they build a building. And they may build a building, like the Capitol building, flat on the ground, right? Make it a prairie-type design, as it's called, the Frank Lloyd Wright stuff, where it's low to the ground, square, very much built into nature, but you could easily ram it with a car bomb, right? If you get in early enough and you understand that that's a building that's vulnerable, you can say, you know what, if we can design this a little differently, maybe we're just going to put things like big rocks and bollards around the outside of the building as part of the design. You know, if you walk down the Slippery Rock campus, you have those big rocks everywhere, symbolic of the university and its name. But they are also fantastic devices for protecting. I know in front of the library there are a number of those large rocks that, frankly, you couldn't ram that building from those angles because of those rocks. That's a CPTED kind of a thing if it's done on purpose, and if it's done by accident, power to you, you've got a security gain there. But if you can get in early, you can make those design changes and be part of that design team. So building and construction and renovations, huge part of what engineering does, huge tie into the security of the building once it's opened up and ready to operate. Most people don't think a lot about space planning and space assignment. I mean, you get to your first job and they say, here's your office, and you never think about, how did this become my office? Why is it the size it is? Why is it where it is? Why does it have certain features? And that's all part of space planning, and there are people whose job is solely space planning in many companies to make sure that you optimally use space and give people the room they need to succeed without going overboard. So think about executives, medical, HR. HR is a place where sometimes firings take place. Security works with HR, right, when there's terminations. We learned about that. But what if HR is buried into the very center of a large facility? Let's say you have a facility the size of, I don't know. Let's make it the size of a hockey arena. Would you put your HR department at center ice, or would you put them on the edge? If you're going to fire people, then you're going to need to get them out of the building once they've been fired, right? And sometimes they go quietly, and sometimes they want to make a show of it. Would you rather have them walk through the entire arena making a show of it, perhaps contributing to toxicity in the workplace, right? Or would you rather just get them out quick through a side door and be done with it? So same thing with executives. Executives like to have corner offices, but a corner office on the ground floor is nothing more than an attractant for someone to do harm to that executive, right? You can get to them, you can see what they're doing. At night when they work late, which many of them do, you can see in from the outside what they're doing. It's a sniper's dream, quite frankly. Medical. So you have a occupational health office, and you've got it way deep in the facility, but that's where somebody goes when they're not feeling well. And sometimes when they're not feeling well, they decide they're having chest pains, and now you've got to get them out in an ambulance. Do you even have the right amount of space to get a gurney through from your occupational health all the way to probably a loading dock, which is where many ambulances will pull up at a facility when there's a medical emergency, right? All of those things need to be considered, right? Are they private areas? Are they conducive to a quick response? The whole idea of cube farms, many companies are now going to open office environments. It's been a thing for about the last decade. There's starting to become more and more articles about how they've been counterproductive. But instead of having an office, everybody sits at a big communal table, opens up their laptop, and works and collaborates. That's great in some fields. Not so great in security when you're trying to put together an investigative matter and you've got 20 people sitting at a table with you, and you really can't talk to anyone on the phone privately. You've got to go into another room to make a phone call. But think about that from an information security perspective. If you're laying out everything you have in front of you paperwork-wise, and some of it may be rather sensitive, if you're an HR person, can you really work in one of those environments? Space planning decides and helps decide what people need a closed-door office and which ones can work in open cube farms. And I would suggest that cube farms are the biggest threat to information security, more so than hackers in some cases, because all the information that hackers have, realistically, is probably printed sitting in somebody's desk, and you can just go cube to cube during lunchtime and pick up an awful lot of it. It's a little harder to put it together, but it sure is easier if you're an insider to get it that way. And what about space for your own security needs? Most security departments will run a monitoring center. You will have an alarm system and a camera system, and they need to be monitored somewhere. Cameras aren't just for going back later and taking a look to see what happened. You want to be able to monitor them in most cases and set them up with motion sensors and alarms for certain types of motions with AI to determine, if somebody walks by that isn't wearing a uniform, perhaps. If you have a manufacturing plant, you want to know if somebody's walking into the manufacturing area without a manufacturing uniform. That would be a potential problem, be something you at least want to key in on and understand why that person's in the area. And you can set cameras now to do that. It will look for the color of your specific uniform and its type and its name tag and those things and tell you when somebody's there. But if you don't have a good monitoring room, that's pretty hard to do. Good monitoring rooms in today's environment are really controlled by a UL listing. At least that's the way to determine if it's one that's worth doing business with. So let's go and talk about that a little bit, because it's a space planning need if you have an internal monitoring room that you're going to need to consider. So everybody's seen the tag that says UL listed. I'm sure you have. You open up, take the lampshade off any lamp in your house and take a look. It'll probably say UL listing on there, Underwriters Laboratories. And it is a private certification and testing company that conducts independent tests of products. They don't test every single product. Not every lamp goes to UL, but they look at the design and the engineering and the construction quality of products, and they put their seal on it. It's like a seal of approval, if you will. If you get a UL listed product, you have some assurance that it's safe for use. Okay? It's mostly a safety certification, but also a quality one. Okay? Well, UL listing standards are written for all types of products, including security monitoring, burglar alarm monitoring, right? Intrusion detection systems. They all have a UL standard. UL standard is part of the reading this week, and if you look at it, you go to the pages that I've indicated, I think it's 14 through 19, 18 or 19. Those are all questions about the construction of your room. What's the roof made of? What's the floor made of? Are you on an outside wall? Are there windows? What are the windows constructed of? Is it protected glass or just plain glass? All of those are physical security requirements, right? There's a standard, 827, UL 827, that basically tells you how you build a security monitoring room. You really shouldn't just open one of those things up in your own basement, right? Is there proper fire protection? Can somebody just walk in from the street, right? If you only have if you're setting up in your basement and somebody's just got to walk through your front door, down the stairs, and they're in your basement, there's no protections between. There's no automatic door closer with a lock on it and perhaps access control and a hardened door, then they could take over your facility, right? There's really a interesting conversations going on now because many security control centers, because of COVID-19 and other reasons, are going virtual, and people are monitoring major facilities from their home. They sit in their home on a laptop and watch cameras and alarm systems and dispatch people who are at the facility to go in and take care of these things. And there's really a discussion about, how safe is that? Because if I can go into that person's home and just take over that laptop, I could shut all the alarms off. I could turn the view to the camera off for everybody from that position. So, a UL listing is something that really only applies legally to contracted monitoring centers. So if I pay somebody, like you have an ADT system on your house, you have an alarm system, that's monitored in a UL listed monitoring center. You don't need to have a UL listing if you're monitoring your own alarms. However, why would you not want to have the same standard as somebody that you might contract to do it? Wouldn't you want to build a center that has the same standard that everybody else in the industry that's doing it for a living under contract is using? And you need your engineering facilities people to understand that standard. You need to be able to have that discussion with them about that standard when you build your security monitoring room. We talked a little bit about repairs and maintenance and things like just the housekeeping, getting rid of the trash, right? The potential for actual real contamination of areas when engineering functions like that aren't done correctly. But there's also repair shops, and from a security perspective, repair shops they're theft magnets, because they have all of the things people need for their home. If someone just needs a small piece of copper pipe to do a plumbing repair at home, why would I run to the hardware if I can just run down to the maintenance shop where I work and grab one off the shelf? And while I'm at it, I don't have a pipe wrench to put that on, so I'll just borrow this one because nobody's going to miss it, and I'll bring it back, maybe. And that maybe is usually no. But people, I think, in most cases, when they go to maintenance shops like that, they intend to bring things back. They just don't. Right? They borrow a ladder and it never makes its way back. And then the company needs that pipe wrench because there was a bust in a water pipe supplying a manufacturing process that needed water, and they can't find that wrench. Right? You should make sure those rooms are secured properly, and you can make great friends in your maintenance department when you need something maintained. If you take their theft issues, which are many, seriously. Right? When you go into your first facility and you look at where the repair shop is, you should see how they store things and whether anybody and everybody can walk in and out of that shop and talk to them about potential theft
and if there's been any issues of things they just have to replace all the time, like wrenches and ladders tend to be very popular. And so that's one way that that security and repairs and maintenance absolutely work together. Is there a way for security patrols to look for maintenance issues? So I have security patrols. I think last we checked, we've got about around in the U.S. about 600 hours per day of security patrol coverage walking through buildings. It's normally an insurance requirement, right? You want someone to walk through to make sure there's no fire or flood in an area, and if you do that, your insurance underwriter will not charge you as much for liability insurance for your facility if you've got those patrols going through. A watch tour, right? A fire watch tour is really what it's called. But while you're doing that, could you not also train your guards into how to look for certain things, listen for certain things, right? Big air handlers in buildings, the big air conditioning units you see on the roof, they run on motors, and those motors can have certain smells when they're going bad, right? You can smell the burning. Belts squeak when they're not properly adjusted. Well, if a security patrol is going through a maintenance area, right, one of those is up on the roof even, and one of those big machines is starting to make a squeaking noise, is there a way for you to work with engineering to have a way to report that, right? We will go through every 2 hours. We go up on the rooftop because it's required from our insurance carrier that we check the roof for fires, floods, and other anomalies every 2 hours. If I hear something squeaking, I'm going to report it. And that way, every 2 hours, we get a report on our maintenance on that particular machine, and we can keep it from becoming a real disaster where a belt breaks and now there's no air conditioning in the building or no heat in the building and the temperatures are extreme and people go home. And then is there an equal opportunity to train maintenance people on security equipment and security processes for all that matter, right? Can you train your own repairs and maintenance people in-house to work on a camera, to hook one up, to fix a door lock rather than call a locksmith? There are a lot of crossovers on shared risk and shared mitigations here in repairs and maintenance. I think those are really some of the biggest ones you're ever going to find that are just so simple to train security people to look for maintenance issues and to train maintenance people to repair and work on security equipment are huge shared risk, shared reward opportunities. And that's the facility side. And again, making friends with those folks is really key to getting those conversations started. When we talk about capital projects in an engineering environment, we're normally talking about building projects, right? A new building's going up on campus. In Slippery Rock, just in the last few years, the dance program is having a major renovation to the auditorium, and it's really a cool project. Well, some cases, at some point they're going to run electric wiring through that building, and they have already actually. But at some point they brought in huge spools of copper wire, and huge spools of copper wire are amongst the number one things stolen from construction sites because it's easy to fence, right? You got a couple of options. You could sell it to another construction company who needs it. You could sell it to an electrician or several electricians in pieces. You can cut it. You can sell it on eBay, 100-foot lengths for whatever. Or you can melt the whole thing down and sell it for copper value, which has been, fairly high over the last few years. So you have guards that you put during certain phases of these construction projects. So security and engineering work together on that. And by the way, the cost of guards when you use them for capital projects gets capitalized, so your budget doesn't take a hit when you have to put extra guards on. The engineering people will just put that on the capital project, and that is totally legal. Do major projects create vulnerabilities during execution? Sure they do. Not just, electric wire and plumbing, but think about the fact that when you get to the point of painting in a building, the building's almost done and now you're going to paint it, and especially floor painting where they use heavy epoxies, you have to leave doors open. Well, is that one building connected to another one, or is part of that building being used and part of it being renovated, but we need to kick the doors open because there's terrible fumes? Or are we bringing in a lot of people that we have never seen before? In the beginning stages, when you put a building shell up, now you're going to be bringing the drywall in, right, to build offices. And you may bring in 2-3 truckloads of drywall. Well, people who carry that are not normally people that you're going to employ every day. You bring those people in, they carry the drywall, and then you never see them again. It's a high number of unscreened workers. You don't know what their backgrounds are. So there's a vulnerability, right? And then there's turnkey projects, and that's what most projects are these days. A turnkey project is one where a single entity is contracted and they do everything related to the project. And that is how most big construction projects go. So that dance building on the Slippery Rock campus, that auditorium, which is really a beautiful facility, was built under one construction manager. You hired one company to build a building. They didn't just bring in their employees. In fact, most of the employees that came to work every day were not their direct employees. They needed plumbers. They went to a local plumbing company. They needed electricians. They hired local electricians. They hired local carpenters. Most of those people were not their employees, but they were contracted people. Again, opens up a vulnerability because you have people who you are not really familiar with walking around on your facility. And then you also have to understand what level of control you have over some of those things if you need them for your own purpose. So when you're going to build a new building and you want to put an alarm system in, who actually is running that wire? You need to understand, working with the engineer, who you need to talk to get that done right so that your alarm system works in the end. So again, capital projects, big construction projects in this case, really require a lot of security and engineering interface and a lot of coordination, because you want to be able to get out of that building what you can, and you also have to understand there are huge vulnerabilities while a building's being built that opens up your facility to security vulnerabilities. So utilities and utilities maintenance. You go by that big plant at the front of the Slippery Rock campus and you see the utilities and power building, and it takes an awful lot of work to generate the power and steam for the heating systems and the water systems for a facility that size. If you shut down utilities, you've pretty much shut down everything. If the campus, and we'll use our campus again as our example, as our workplace, but think about any big workplace. If the water gets shut off, everybody goes home. You legally can't continue to work without water, right? For hygiene purposes. So if utilities get shut down, everything gets shut down, and that's a huge burden on a utilities department. So if you think about utility feeds, not just water, but also electricity and other utilities, are they protected? Right? The feeds come in from the street. I remember a facility I went to that had, they told me they had redundant utility feeds, which means that you have power coming in from two different directions. If somebody hits a power pole on the north side of that facility, power's still coming in from the south, and that takes over and you don't lose electricity. The issue they had was at some point they all come together, and it came together at a power pole and right in the middle of the facility, and then went into their distribution plant, if you will, where the power was distributed out to other buildings. So even though they had redundant power coming in from two different directions outside, once you got inside, if somebody hit that pole on the inside, it was pretty much lights out, pun intended, right? And from a security perspective, my thought was, okay, I need to put bollards around that, because power means my security system was going to go down. My cameras were going to go down because they weren't on a generation system at that particular facility. So I had a vested interest in protecting the power and had to think about bollards going around that single pole so that if somebody tried to ram it, they would first hit a concrete and steel barrier, right, beforehand and not be able to get to that pole. But in case somebody did get to that pole, is recovery part of crisis planning, and security managers are often tasked with crisis planning. Emergency management, the new emergency management minor that I've encouraged many of you to consider, because in corporate America, crisis planning and emergency planning normally falls to either safety or security or a combination thereof. So is utility recovery part of your crisis plan? And then things like refrigeration, heating, ambient temperature for products. Products often have to be stored at a certain temperature. You can't store new TVs if it's 30 below zero outside for very long. The components break down. Or in a truck waiting to be delivered, sitting outside when it's 100 degrees outside, and it gets to be 170 in the back of that truck, those components start to melt. So what happens if power goes down? Well, you have certain cooling and heating systems that keep your storage areas in a facility at the right temperature. And if they go down, those particular refrigeration units, even freezers, right, for certain products, drug products being one of them, food products, you're going to bring in freezers from the outside, and now you're going to be opening doors to take stuff in and out. You've got a security issue, right? And then finally, utilities maintenance and utilities people, do they put your stuff on backup power or generated power? If not, then it's time to have a conversation with your utilities folks, right? There's the shared risk of no security when the lights are out. That's the worst time to have no security alarms, is when the campus goes dark, right? You want to have things working. You want your cameras that work in low light to be able to come back so you can see what's going on around campus, even though it's dark outside. And if you don't have that in place, that generated power, everything goes dark. Again, a conversation, a shared risk that the campus could go dark based on somebody hitting a pole, maybe based on a vulnerability to the generator, right? Generators need to be protected as well. And it's a shared risk, or because the security stuff goes out, you can't protect it. So you really should be working on shared mitigation in an ESRM model with these guys. So I asked you a whole lot of questions there. I answered several of them, I hope. But you really need to build an authentic relationship with engineering facilities, because there are so many things that you can do for each other. The shared risks. When one has a risk, often the other one has the mitigation, and in some cases those risks are the same. Right? One of the big things to forming a great relationship with engineering facilities is don't be too rigid. I have seen security managers that are too rigid and they blow that relationship. This is definitely probably the most important partnership you will have when it comes to a relationship, a true trust relationship. HR will work with you whether or not they like you or not. Finance needs to work with you because it's part of their job and you need to work with them. IT, same way. But when it comes to facilities, I will tell you that facilities managers tend to be, look, quite frankly, they can be gruff and they can be intensely loyal people, and they really flourish in a environment of trust. And if you don't have that, you're not going to win. So, for instance, you have a rule that says that no one can work, nobody can bring in any contracted people to work in the facility after 9 p.m. Because after 9 p.m. you go from 2 guards to 1, and that second guard can't watch anybody. And the engineering department has a project where they have to get it done. They're finishing up a room, executive office for the CEO, and their painter can't get in there until 6 p.m. It's the last thing they need to do is paint, right? And the next day they want to put the carpet down, and then the room is going to be ready. They got to get the painting done. He can't get in until 6 p.m. He's not going to finish till 10. A foolish security manager will go to the engineering department and say, I'm sorry, but after 9, they can't work in the facility. We don't allow contractors after 9 because they don't have a guard to watch them. A smart one either puts another guard on or tells that one guard that's remaining, get up and take a look, or watch on the camera, or have them check in and check it out with you. If you're too rigid in your own rules with engineering people, you will fail in that relationship, and it's one that you can't fail in and be successful as a security manager. Remember, the guy with the wrench matters, right? That's the other thing, is that people tend to look at the facilities people in such a way that they're not as important as the executive. But again, let's look at that garbage strike. Nothing shut down New York City like a garbage strike. And the garbage man became the most important person in the city, not the mayor. So I just want you to continue to look at ways that you can build with your engineering department and build trust. Most important of any of the organizations we've discussed is building trust with an engineering department. So with engineering facilities as an ESRM partner, we've always gone the extra step to say, okay, how do they work with security, and how does security work with them on shared risk, shared reward, shared mitigations? But what about that third partner? We always, at the end of our exercises, our discussion, we said, how does this impact, what's another department that might be impacted? Well, let's think about some of the things with utilities, with HR. What if the power goes out? HR makes the decision, do people stay or do they go home, right? And are they being paid? That is certainly a shared risk. If the power goes out, there is a risk to HR because they have to make a determination if people get paid. And if people don't get paid and you send them home without pay because there's no power, and you have power problems for an entire summer, how long is it before they say, you know what, I need to go find another job because I'm losing too much pay? Finance departments and procurement departments, as part of finance, put in just-in-time deliveries. Just-in-time deliveries really started with the auto industry, I think, more than any other. Rather than stockpile, 300 mufflers, you need 30 mufflers each day to put on the cars that you're producing. You have 30 brought in each day. You don't have to have the space that you need for storage. You don't have to have the cost of buying things that you may not need. If something goes wrong and you just don't need that many, you can say don't deliver that day. But if the utilities shut down, can these just-in-time deliveries be accepted? Right? Do we have the ability to open the overhead doors to bring these things in? Do we have the power to see where we're putting them in the warehouse? And then for security, I mean, can I still operate my control center if the power goes out? Is my control center UL listed where I have auxiliary power? That's why you want to UL list it. Another reason, right? Because if you have that standard, everybody agrees you should meet that standard, you'll have backup power. But the shared risk for security right there is, can I operate without power? So if you really look at the rest of the functions, think about a risk to the enterprise that's shared with engineering and maintenance. And there are many, many, many things. If you think about how engineering and maintenance, how facilities can be shut down without their services, how that may be a risk to other people, and why they're such an important part of the ESRM family. Let's quickly take a look at some of those other functions. Just one apiece here. Building design and construction, okay? Certainly there is a shared risk if the building is not built well enough for, high enough off the ground, let's say, for a car bomb to hit it. So CPTED, working with the security department, certainly can help that mitigate that, right? You decide you want to put stairs in the front of the building while it's being built, so it's up off the ground a little bit. Maybe you just put boulders and large planters around the front of your facility. In our physical security course, we actually do that design. In the course that I teach, I have students from week 1 to week 15 design physical security of a factory. And we start with that, the factory's already built in this case, but the grounds are not. So what can you do in the grounds level to protect? And that's working with the risk of a security incident, working with engineering to mitigate that risk. Space planning, protection of executives. Again, you put that executive in the corner office on a ground level building where everybody can see him, anybody can ram him, anybody can take a shot at him, anything could happen to that executive, even just to embarrass him. Your stock price could go down. A huge problem. Repairs and maintenance, if you don't have good machinery, employees could get laid off because they can't produce stuff, and profits drop. Finance doesn't like that, neither does HR, because now HR is worrying about whether to pay those people, and finance is wondering where the money's going to come from. And then capital project management, we talked about capital projects. Engineering and maintenance has a huge dog in that fight, if you will. Could be tax issues, could be workers idle if they can't use capital equipment to their fullest. So again, there are many risks that engineering brings that are shared by others, and you should work together to mitigate those risks as part of your ESRM model. So here we are, we've added one more person to the family, right? We have security and HR and finance and IT, and now engineering and maintenance, all working together to understand the risks to the business, to bring them forward, to rank them, and to share in mitigations when we can, to protect the entire enterprise. Really what enterprise security risk management is about, what a security manager's job is not simply to just throw up nilly-willy security type features, cameras, guards, and guns, but rather to understand the risks everyone has, to rank them, and then to work on shared mitigations so that everybody's risk gets considered to make the business stronger. So here we are, almost at 45 minutes. Deliverables. You watched the lecture. We're all done. Thank you for your attention on this. The reading is relatively light this week. It's nothing too heavy. I do want you to look at that UL standard and a few other things, but it's not anything that you can't do in a relatively short amount of time. There is a quiz due this week. And also this, I want you to think a little bit about engineering facilities. We talked about them as being a kind of a big player, right? They impact so many things. They have such a big budget. Think about your facility security committee discussion last week. And some people thought FSC was a good model, the one person, one vote. But I want you to think about whether somebody like facilities and engineering, with their outsized influence on budget and on how we work, whether or not they would carry too much power and influence over others at that one department, one vote model, and whether that might influence. I just want you to think about that, because as you go forward, you'll be setting up your own security management team and your own model, either an FSC type one where everybody votes, or one that's closer to the pure ESRM we've studied, where everybody talks about their risks, the security manager does the rating, and then works on the mitigations together with everyone. But I want you to really think about how engineering, with its outsized budget and its outsized influence on everything we do, whether they'd have an outsized vote on that FSC. As always, call, text if you want to discuss anything about the course. I'd like to get some feedback from folks about how it's going. Next week is our midterm. And so there will be no lecture, there will be no reading. It will strictly be a midterm. It's going to be half multiple choice, okay, and a one-page written submittal. You will need to do both. The written submittal will go in Dropbox, and I will open up the Dropbox as soon as I'm able to, right? The university has rules about when we can open up midterms. I can't do it early. But so it's only going to be a one-page written. When we talk about one page, that's 250 words. Same as your discussion, double-spaced, 12-point fonts, 1-inch margins, gives you about 1 page, right, on 250 words. The quiz is going to be 10 questions, and there's going to be no time limit on the quiz, and it will cover everything we've learned so far. Don't sweat the midterm. Usually people find my midterms and my finals to be the easiest part of the course. So with that, have a great week. If you need anything, please reach out. See you soon.